You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Joe Pepper, CEO of tmgroup, and Nick Ball, Sales Director at Mio, which is part of tmgroup. Welcome along, chaps. Thank you for joining.
Great to be invited. Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
We're here today to talk about your report, The New Normal. Although, as we were just talking about off air, I think even since the report's been written, the conveyancing market has actually moved forward quite a distance. So as much as we're going to look back at your report and talk about what the new normal sort of looks like for conveyancers and technology providers and the whole home moving process, I think we're as interested in what the future looks like as well in terms of the property market. But tell us briefly about the new normal, the report that you guys wrote. How did it come about? Where was the research that you guys did for it?
Well, it goes back over a year actually, because we did a report coming out of the first year of the pandemic at the start of 2021, where we kind of thought that the pandemic was behind us to some respects, and we were kind of sort of looking forward with a view as to what would happen when the stamp duty relief period ended on the 31st of May 2021, as we thought it was going to do, which of course it later did not. So we'd done that, and we got a huge amount of interest and participation in that, and I think we kind of realised that there was a rich seam of opinion out there. Particularly given the disruption that had gone on in the market over the preceding 9 months at that point, and at the end of 2020. So we thought it would be a very good exercise to go through it again towards the end of 2021, with a view that obviously by that point the stamp duty would have ended, and we would have a view as to what would people's opinions would be in the market going forward. So we went through a process. Our marketing team went through a process of contacting our clients, and of course, we've got well over 1,000 conveyancers that use our platforms in some way, shape, or form. But obviously, so we've got a rich database and a rich heritage as a business that's been around over 20 years to sort of contact people and to get their opinions. And we got over 800 people providing their feedback through a survey. The vast majority of those obviously from conveyancing, and that's what you'd expect from tmgroup, but also a significant number of estate agents in that number, a sort of handful, I guess, of other sort of professionals in the market, such as lenders and surveyors. And it gave us a really rich tapestry, I think, in terms of data that we were then able to look at and draw some conclusions from, and that's what we presented in the report.
And this new normal is a phrase that's kind of been adopted relatively widely, but what were the key findings in the report in terms of what's happening in the property market?
I think we'd gone through such a massive period of change that we hadn't expected to go through. When we go back to the start of 2020, for example, I remember reading a report from somebody else who commissioned a report with law firms looking at how they intended to move forward with their working practices. And they all said the right things. We're going to do digitization, we're going to allow some remote working, we can do it. But their horizon was 5 to 10 years hence. And that was in January 2020. And then March 2020 happened. And of course, it all went out the window. And so I think, we've been through this process of change, and when you go through anything traumatic, there's something else appears. And I don't want to blow it out of proportion here, but, certainly if you look at what happened when people came back from the First World War, the way that society had operated, the way that farmers had farmed, et cetera, in the period running up to the war was completely different to the way that people operated going forward. And as I said, it sounds a bit like I'm going over the top there, but I think, it illustrates the point. If you go through a period of significant change, or a period is thrust upon you which forces you to change, then you need to adapt to that and create a new normal.
And Nick, what kind of changes does the report highlight that we're starting to see across the market? Because you've got insights into both the agency market and the conveyancing space.
Yeah. Well, the leading point there, David, is that they recognised the need for greater collaboration across all of the sectors. So not just estate agents and conveyancers communicating with others, but lenders, improvement in local authorities as well, because there's various impacts of delays within the transaction. So that was the probably the unsurprising number one lead. And of course, Joe's referenced the adoption of tech. It was forced upon the industry. I think from my estate agency hat, estate agents were relatively progressive in terms of adopting change sooner than conveyancers. It's the pandemic that actually forced that change on the conveyancing space. And as a mental health first aider, for me, one thing the report also highlighted is the lack of well-being schemes and programs for conveyancers. They were obviously at the coalface of a lot of the pressures of the property transaction. Who did they have to turn to? Was there any support given within their own businesses or within the industry, within the sector, as opposed to the estate agency space, where agents very early on jumped on the mental health bandwagon, seeing how important it was with the pandemic by forming agents together, which is one of their support networks, which I think was an exceptional initiative.
I think the other thing that I found really interesting come out of it, and you touched on it there, Nick, was in relation to staff and well-being, but also how that translates into how, as a business owner operating in the conveyancing market, people have needed to address some of the changes that have gone on, because what I think that most people acknowledged that they saw was that in this incredibly roller coaster up and down period that we went through in 2020 and 2021, the vast majority of firms were only able to carry out their business because of the extraordinary level of dedication of the people in those firms. It really was a call to arms, I think, to an awful lot of conveyancers. A lot of people really stepped up and went well beyond what would normally be expected of them, and that is great, and we should celebrate that and we should reward that, but we cannot rely on that as something that's going to always be there to deal with not just similar but just the changing nature of the way that things go in the future. We need to basically ensure that our people have the right tools so that they don't need to do these ludicrous hours that so many people were working in this period of time to deliver a service. To be frank, the blame game is one of those that gets kind of sort of pointed around the place, and I certainly do not in any way, shape or form blame conveyancers. But the amount of time it took to transact and the service that people got in that period of time was lower than you would normally expect. So we were offering a substandard service, and we were only able to do that because people were working every hour they were sent to deal with it, and that's unsustainable. That is not a sustainable model going forward. And I think what is really interesting to me in particular is what are the operating models of those businesses going to be over the course of the next few years.
There's a telling comment in the report, and it's old-fashioned paper-based processes have pulled conveyancers back to the office at a time when, as you both identify, the pandemic forced them to work from home, but it also forced them to adopt newer technology to enable that. To what extent did the research that you've undertaken indicate that technology is being used more widely and is being more widely adopted?
I think there's the sort of question something pulled people back to the offices, paper-based processes pulled back to the offices, assumes that conveyancers really left the offices. And I would say, in my experience of talking to conveyancers up and down the country, that's nowhere near a complete picture. I mean, there's an awful lot of conveyancers that, never really left the office. Now, they might have been forced out at the first stage to get out of the office in some way, shape or form, but they very quickly had to implement processes to get information from that office, because everything still revolved around the office. And some firms literally went back as soon as they were able to and worked in the offices, because that's the only way that they could function anywhere near a sensible level of efficiency. And some firms built processes in whereby, they had to go into the office, twice a week to pick up papers, to do activities that carried out. Well, that's fine, but of course it damages the service proposition, because the customer potentially has got to wait a couple of days to get a piece of information that they might otherwise have been able to get, or the process could have moved on if that information had been to hand. Or they had people in the office, frantically digitizing this material and sort of sending it over, which again adds a significant element of inefficiency to the process. So again, I don't think that they ever truly left. And how much did they adopt technology? What we see in the report is that there was, the areas where technology was most widely adopted in this period was the off-the-shelf stuff. The stuff you could literally just go and get your hands on, like electronic signatures. That's the biggest single area outside of Zoom and team meetings and all those other sort of bits and pieces, which obviously we got hold of pretty quickly. That's the biggest single area of change. And that is, significantly because, you, me, Nick, any of us can go on to Adobe Sign or DocuSign or any other signature company I might be able to think of, and literally download the ability to do electronic signatures. I don't need to go through any sort of change process within a business. So that got a big level of adoption. And things like, I suppose, customer portals that could be provided ready-made effectively, if you like, by, we've got TM Connect, for example, as a platform, that you've already got a relationship with the supplier, and you can just say, can you turn me onto that? And it can be delivered within a couple of weeks. That sort of stuff could get done. But the bigger stuff, the stuff that requires kind of fundamental change, simply never got done, because you don't really have the time to implement that.
Nick, you suggested that the agency market has been quicker to adopt technology, prop tech, but with a lot of experience in conveyancing, and perhaps with your conveyancing hat on, do you sort of feel that there is this desire to move forward with technology and improve the conveyancing process?
Absolutely. I mean, if you go back to the estate agents versus conveyancers for a second, at the end of the day, the conveyancers are the ones that are carrying all of the risk. So, an estate agent can go out there and sit in somebody's front room and win an instruction, and away they go. They're very happy. There's not a great need for upfront information, but the risk really does sit with the conveyancer. The processes that they have in place, you could argue that the conveyancing process is old and antiquated. It's still operating under the Law of Property Act 1925 and what have you. Does that need to be changed? Do they need greater support from the SRA or their Council for Licensed Conveyancers? Probably the answer is yes. But there is definitely an appetite for the conveyancing space to want to change. I question whether or not they understand all of the prop tech solutions that are out there and how they research those. Again, the estate agency world is blessed. It has a number of retailers who support the people like ICG and Kerfuffle who look at all of the prop tech solutions and offer up a professional support advice to estate agents. What do the conveyancers have? How do they actually look at the latest prop tech? Bearing in mind that they're in the busiest marketplace we've actually ever known. They still have to do the day job. How do they know what's going to work for their business or not? I think we are starting to see a slight change in that they have a little bit more bandwidth to actually research what is available, but it is still a very, very busy marketplace.
Conveyancers are by and large small businesses. Even the big conveyancers are small business by the most sort of standards as to how you define a small business. And of course, we're all operating in a hugely interdependent marketplace, where there are simply, lots of different parties representing, also lots of different businesses representing different parties as part of the process. And therefore, it's very difficult to be a conveyancer and to think, okay, I'll have some great tech, and that's, everything's going to work really, really well for me, because unless it's talking to other people's tech, it's really challenging to be actually able to demonstrate that to the consumer. And the consumer, of course, is used to, the Amazon experience, right? You go on, you order something, it tells you when it's left the factory, it tells you when it's in the car, and it tells you when it's arriving at your front door, it tells you when it's been delivered. This just doesn't exist, and in the sort of in the conveyancing market. So I think one of the biggest areas of opportunity for conveyancers to be looking at, I think, Nick, it sort of ties into what you were just saying there, is that they look at their current suppliers and look at what they've got at the moment and look to force those organizations to ensure that they have open API architecture and that they are happy and willing and easily persuadable to integrate with other parties, because that has been, I think, one of the great downfalls of this market over the last few years. Everybody's coming up with a solution in silo, and everybody's really scared about making their solution open to everybody else.
So the report was released in 2021, back end of 2021, and we're 6 months into 2022. There were a number of predictions made. How are we faring against those market predictions? Because there's still a huge amount of volatility out there.
What has definitely changed, David, in the last 6 months is the greater degree of conversations being taken place between agents and conveyancers. Agents have realised that they need to have a better working relationship with conveyancers, and likewise conveyancers with estate agents as well, because you can be tarred with the brush that they don't pick up the phone, they don't communicate, and we don't know what's going on. There's definitely a need to actually move forward and work smarter together.
A lot has changed in the last 6 months. I mean, obviously at a sort of macroeconomic level, when people were thinking about 2022, they weren't thinking about 10% inflation, cost of living crisis, and so on and so forth, and all the other sort of bits and pieces that go with that as well. And I think that is filtering into the housing market. But the way that I think about it is that demand has outweighed supply in this market for forever, quite frankly, and certainly since the 1980s. And in the last couple of years, we've seen demand rocket and we've seen supply drop. Now, I think there is a little element that some of these macroeconomic impact will drop demand a little bit. But we're still not seeing supply anywhere near catching up with its historic position either. I think that the challenge for me is going back to what I was saying about people. We've got this industry with these tremendous people that keep everything going, quite frankly. We just need to make sure that we are supporting those people with the right technology and the right processes. And creating the right environment so that it's an industry where they can come in and feel like they're making a difference in a positive way, rather than the challenge that they get in terms of constantly underwhelming customers' expectations, which is often driven by the fact that customers' expectations haven't been set properly in the first place. And again, I don't want to do the blame game thing, because everybody kind of likes to try and point fingers at everybody else. But there's a huge opportunity in this marketplace. I think huge opportunity in the conveyancing marketplace. I think the conveyancing market has allowed itself to drive itself down on price for a long time, and I think that the opportunity exists to look at the value that they bring to the process, the conveyancer brings to the process, and look to ensure that they're setting the right fees that demonstrate that value and demonstrate that they value themselves
That's a really good point, Joe, because one of the things that the report did highlight is that in a busier marketplace, conveyancers actually started to look at fees, and they increased their fee structures in the hope that they wanted to slow the flow of work coming through the door. What happened? It didn't slow the flow of work coming through the door, and they were able to command a better fee. So again, greater opportunities to put some real value into the conveyancing process, because historically it's not been a value proposition for a law firm. This is a great opportunity to change that.
Yeah, and I think that's about confidence, Nick. I think it's about that's what I'd like to see from conveyancers. I'd like to see more confidence. I'd like to see them, taking pride, getting out and selling the really, really impressive and good work that they do. And that is about how do you communicate what you are going to achieve at the front end versus what you achieve at the back end, and in doing so get a good fee. And from a business perspective, you get a good fee, you're able to reinvest that in your people, you're able to reinvest that in your processes, and you're able to reinvest that in your technology. And a conveyancer, ought to be the person sitting at the hub that makes the whole property transaction happen. And the property transaction is what the consumer is dreaming of. That's why we talk about dream homes. Yeah, you wake up in the morning and you want to move into that dream home, and everything else that happens around it is fluff to some extent. You don't really care about it, but there should be somebody making that happen, and somebody making that person's dream come true. And that ought to be the position that the conveyancer can see themselves in. And I think what I've said earlier is about how can we bring these different how can we make that process better? It's by making these different pieces of technology that we're all starting to use, making them talk to one another. And if I was to give any sort of plea out to the conveyancing community out there, I would say, make your suppliers work for you. Yeah. Get hold of your suppliers and make sure that they make their systems easy to integrate with, because there isn't one solution out there that you need. There isn't one technology pack out there that will give you everything you need. You're going to need a bit from one supplier and a bit from another supplier, and it's going to need to integrate with somebody else's systems. So make sure that the suppliers that you choose are willing to do those things. And if you can do that, then I think you'll be able to create an agile, flexible and scalable business, which will help you succeed in 2022 and beyond.
Fighting words, Joe. Thanks very much indeed. Not all heroes wear capes. It's been great to have you both on the podcast. Thanks so much for your insight and for sharing your thoughts. The new normal is available on the TM Group website. We'll put a link in the write-up so that you can go and download it. Nick, Joe, it's been a delight to chat. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed to everybody for listening in. The Today's Conveyancer podcast will be back shortly. Speak soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.